You can be doing everything right and still drift off signal. Not because you stopped praying, not because you walked away, but because something in the transmission changed and no one told you that faithfulness alone doesn't keep you tuned to God's calling. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that the church almost never knows how to address. It's not the exhaustion of someone who gave up, it's the exhaustion of someone who never stopped. You've shown up, you've served, you've read, you've prayed not as ritual but as genuine, costly pursuit of purpose. And somewhere in the past months, maybe the past year, something shifted. Not dramatically, quietly. Like a radio receiver left in the same spot while the broadcast slowly migrated to a different frequency. The device still works. Your discipline is still intact. But what used to come through clearly, direction, clarity, the unmistakable sense that God was actively writing your story, now arrives as static. And the most disorienting part, you can't point to a sin, you can't identify the moment you fell away. You're still here, still faithful. Which means the answer everyone gives you, pray more, trust more, keep going, doesn't actually fit the problem. Before this ends, I want to show you one sentence from 1 Kings, a single sentence that has reframed every season of purposelessness I have ever walked through. Not a formula, a posture. And when you hear it in context, you won't just understand why this is happening, you'll understand what it actually asks of you. But to get there, we need to look at a story that has nothing to do with the Bible, and everything to do with why faithful people lose their connection to God's calling. In 1944, a Japanese soldier named Hiro Onoda was deployed to the Philippine jungle and given strict orders: do not surrender, keep fighting, we will come back for you. He was loyal, he was disciplined, he was sacrificial in ways most people never understand. He was also still fighting in 1974. The war had ended in 1945. Onoda didn't lose the war because he was weak. He lost 30 years of his life because he was faithfully executing orders from a reality that no longer existed. When his commanding officer finally flew to the jungle, not sent a message, not dropped a leaflet, but came in person to relieve Onoda of his duties, Onoda wept. Not because he had failed, because he had been faithful to the wrong season. Hear that again, he was faithful. And faithfulness, in the absence of updated orders, kept him in a jungle that had long since stopped being the battlefield. Here's what the Christian life almost never teaches you. God's relationship with his people moves through seasons that require different postures. Not different levels of commitment, different postures. The same faith that produces breakthrough in one season can produce spiritual stagnation in the next, if the believer doesn't receive what Scripture calls the updated assignment. This isn't a new idea, it's the pattern woven through the whole of the Bible. Daniel, one of the most faithful men in all of Scripture, reaches a point in chapter 9 where everything has gone quiet. The exile is nearly over, God's promises are moving into a new phase, and Daniel doesn't respond by intensifying his existing disciplines. He enters a season of mourning, fasting, and what I'll call positional prayer, not confessing personal sin but confessing position. We are scattered, we are without a leader, we have drifted from the place where you can use us. He isn't trying harder, he is repositioning. Moses, 40 years in the wilderness after the palace. We read that as preparation. But look more carefully, Moses wasn't being trained in the wilderness, he was being emptied. The burning bush didn't arrive when Moses finally completed his formation. It came when the old identity was quiet enough, small enough to hear something entirely new. The hearing required a different kind of him. And David, anointed as a teenager, crowned as an adult. In the gap between Bethlehem and the throne, David did something almost no one talks about. He kept serving Saul, the very man he was destined to replace, not out of confusion, not out of passive resignation, but because God's calling doesn't advance on your timeline, it advances on God's assignment schedule. And David had the rarest of all spiritual gifts, the ability to remain faithful inside the tension of an in-between season. Here is what nobody in the church wants to say out loud. The spiritual activity of yesterday's assignment, faithfully maintained past its season, doesn't just produce stagnation, it produces noise. Not the noise of sin, the noise of obedience, because you're still praying, you're still reading, you're still serving. But you're doing all of it in the posture of a season that is already closed, and the frequency of God's next calling cannot get through the static of your current spiritual routine. This is not about failure, it is about something far more subtle. It is about faithfulness to what God said without consistent surrender to what God is saying now. Most believers learn how to be faithful to the last assignment. Very few learn how to remain open to the living voice that speaks from beyond it. There are 3 signals, specific biblical signals, that suggest you are faithfully living inside a season God has already moved past. The first, your spiritual disciplines feel mechanical. Not because you're lazy, but because you're executing, like a soldier cleaning his rifle every morning, not because a battle is coming, but because that is what soldiers do. The form is perfect. The fire is low. The second, prayer begins to feel like reporting to a superior who is no longer stationed at that base. You bring your requests, you follow the structure. But the sense of active, directional communion, the unmistakable knowing that you are in genuine dialogue, has gone quiet. The third, your gifts feel wasted rather than deployed. Not that you stopped using them, but there is a growing, quiet certainty that they are being poured into the wrong container. That the thing God placed in you is searching for a different outlet, and your current faithfulness keeps pointing it everywhere except there. And here is where it becomes genuinely difficult. Because the instinctive response to all three signals is to do more prayer, more discipline, more faithfulness. But if the problem is a frequency mismatch, if what is needed is recalibration rather than more volume, then amplifying the old signal doesn't solve the problem. It hardens it. You cannot pray your way into a new assignment if your prayer is anchored in the posture of the old one. So what does recalibration actually look like in Scripture? Three postures emerge, not new programs, not new disciplines, three ancient surrenders that function like resetting the receiver. The first is selective silence. Daniel's morning fast wasn't a spiritual productivity strategy. It was the deliberate dismantling of noise. He stripped away everything that gave him a sense of spiritual accomplishment, not because those things were wrong, but because they had become insulation against what God was preparing to say next. Sometimes God's calling cannot get through until you stop performing the last assignment long enough to listen for the new one. The second is positional confession. Not I have sinned, though that may also be true, but I am misaligned. God, I am showing up with yesterday's map. I'm searching for you in the place where you last met me, and I am open to the possibility that you have moved. This is the exact prayer Daniel prays in chapter 9, not a confession of failure, a confession of location. The third is receptive waiting, and this is the hardest because it looks identical to passivity from the outside. David returned to Ziklag. He didn't campaign for the throne, he didn't chase the closing season. He stayed inside the tension between the old assignment and the new one and let God determine the timing of the shift. Receptive waiting is not an action. It is the refusal to manufacture a clarity that only God can produce. When these three postures come together, silence, positional confession, receptive waiting, something begins to shift. Not immediately, not in a way that announces itself. But the static starts to clear, and what comes through carries a quality that is unmistakable to anyone who has been listening long enough. It sounds like something new, something that requires a different kind of you, not a less faithful you, a differently surrendered you. Now I want to give you the sentence from 1 Kings. Elijah has just witnessed one of the most dramatic supernatural moments in the entire Old Testament, fire from heaven, the defeat of the prophets of Baal. By every measure, the apex of his calling in this season. And then Jezebel threatens him, and he runs all the way to the wilderness. And he sits under a broom tree and says, "It is enough, Lord, take my life." God could have said, "Elijah, stand up and keep fighting." He could have said, "Where is your faith?" He didn't. He sent an angel who touched him and said, and this is the sentence, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." The journey ahead, not behind, too great for the version of you that this season has produced. God was not questioning Elijah's faithfulness. He was telling him, the next assignment requires a nourishment that your current obedience cannot generate alone. Arise and eat. You haven't gone silent because you failed. You may have gone silent because the journey ahead is larger than the version of you your last season was designed to build. The frequency hasn't gone dark. It has moved. And the version of you on the other side of this recalibration, that person is already being prepared for something you cannot yet fully receive. Arise and eat, the next calling is waiting.